Thanks a lot for coming in.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
Something about this community appeals to you?
This is a wonderful place to live.
For Kelowna Now, this is Kent Mulgat. And we're joined by Norm Letnick, our MLA for Kelowna Lake Country. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure, Kent.
So we had this budget.
Yes.
And it got a B plus from the
Minus.
Kelowna, B minus, right, from everybody, from the Kelowna Chamber and from the Vancouver Board of Trade, B minus.
They were very generous.
I was actually shocked that the right-leaning Kelowna Chamber of Commerce would be so generous.
Yeah, well, it takes a few weeks, probably 2 months, for government to put their budget together. And then after they've put their budget together, then they put together the PR plan. So probably another couple of weeks to put the PR plan. And then they have lockup, so they bring in all the stakeholders, especially the ones that have goodies in the budget, because they want them to get out there and say positive things about the budget.
Right.
They bring them into lockup for 3 hours or so, and they're able to go through the budget, and then, of course, they open up the budget to the world. And then the world has a matter of hours to respond to this document that's taken months to prepare.
Which is why it's good to actually talk about a budget maybe a few days later after you've had a chance to kind of digest it.
So once everybody's had a chance to go through the details, the fine print on page 342 or whatever it is,
yes,
then you might see some changes in perspective of the B minus, whether it goes up or down. I'll leave that up to other people. That's why we have this process called estimates. And most people wouldn't be aware of it because I was never aware of it before I was an MLA. Whereby after the budget is tabled, then each minister is responsible to defend their portion of the budget. So they would get up and say, okay, I want $21 billion, healthcare, for example, which I'm the critic of. And then I, as the critic, would have maybe 10 hours to depose the minister, to ask specific questions on the budget, or anything else, for that matter, to do with health. And then over that time, we're able to glean really what's happening in the budget, and then from there come up with a more realistic evaluation of it.
Is that a productive process?
Oh, very much. I would say the two things that are the most productive in the legislature are committee stage for legislation. So this is where the minister introduces a piece of legislation like the speculation tax, for example. It gets some debate at second reading, so we go in and we tell why we hate it or why we love it, depending on which side of the fence you're on. And then it goes to something called committee stage. And again, it's like estimates for the budget, where you go in line by line by line of the legislation and try to discern what the government is trying to achieve, so that later on when the courts have to interpret what the law said, they have something by which they can use to interpret what the government wanted to achieve. And also, it gives the population an opportunity to see what really is in the legislation. So that piece and the estimates piece, I would say, are the two most valuable parts of being in Victoria.
Real productive debate. Because, sometimes you look at what goes on in Victoria.
Well, you see question period.
And if that typifies everything, it's like, wow, it's just everything that the opposition party says is just absolutely to cut down the government, which does nothing but mock the opposition in return, and it doesn't seem overly productive. But yet budgets and legislation, there can be some productive debate. But back to the first thing, what do you think of the budget? What grade would you give it?
Well, I taught business at Okanagan College for 9 years. If a student would have brought this budget to me, I would have said, go back and do it again. So I don't think it got a passing grade.
Okay, but you're supposed to fail it because you're in opposition.
Well, I didn't say fail yet, right? I just said go back and do it again, and I'll tell you why. The budget is a 1-year budget. It's supposed to be a 3-year budget. But if you look at the budget, it's like a 3.9% increase in healthcare funding for 1 year, and then the precipitous drop in year 2 and year 3 to health authorities. You got money in there for school districts in year 1, and then next to nothing in year 2 and year 3. Colleges, again, some money in year 1, and next to nothing in year 2 and year 3. I think it's like 0.2%. So really, when you look at the budget, for me, it's an election budget. It's let's put out the goodies, and if the Green Party decides to pull the plug, and I don't think they are, but if they did decide to pull the plug, then we can go to the people, because the big piece of the budget is the child benefit credit, right? But that doesn't kick in until fall not this fall of next year. All right.
Right.
So that's the challenge. Is the budget is a one-year budget, and
So, which was a very cautious way to play it, which you can kind of understand why they would be cautious. They are holding on to this, basically tenuous arrangement with the Green Party, so they're trying not to rock the boat.
well, I think what they're stuck with is they have a lot of members on the NDP side that want to spend money. They've not only spent all the money that we had put aside as the government, the previous government, and the economy is still going more or less strong in some areas because of that, but they're also spending the full federal one-time transfer payment of $1.6 billion in this budget. What happens if that transfer payment stops next year? Because it was a one-time transfer payment, right? So, and they only have like $200 or $300 million out of a almost $60 billion budget.
But it is a surplus.
As a cushion. Well, that can go like that.
Sure,
All you need is
sure
one
can.
bad fire season, and that's gone. So, again, I look at this budget and I say, well, there's some nice goodies for sure.
Okay, let's talk about some of the goodies.
Yeah.
Do you disagree with their plan to, for instance, eliminate interest on student loans, the provincial student loans?
Well, there's pros and cons to that, right?
Sure, certainly a pro if you're a student.
Yeah, but the con is you have all this money that's not going to colleges anymore. As I said at the beginning, you got a 1-year lift for colleges, and year 2 and year 3 have next to nothing. So what's going to happen?
Well, we'll have another budget within a year.
But this is supposed to be a 3-year budget. It's supposed to be a 3-year plan. That's why I say go back and do it again. Spread out your money over 3 years, and then see whether or not you could afford to wipe out the interest rates.
So you might have held off on that one.
Well, let me explain why, okay? So in the 1990s, and I know people say, oh, there you go, you're going back to the 90s, but it's reality. In the 1990s, it took a year for a lot of students to finish, a year more to finish their diplomas or degrees. Why? Because the budgets were really tight for colleges. So they couldn't offer all the programs that the students need at the right time. So they had to spend more time. So what did that do? Well, it cost them money because they had to spend another year on campus or another year at home. And on top of that, they couldn't go into the workforce for 6 months or a year, depending on how long they had to take. Well, that's way more expensive than a few interest dollars on student loans, right? So that's what I'm saying. It's like a pre-election budget, which is, okay, this group of students, and you've been advocating for this for years, and I respect that. We're going to give you this. But at the same time, on the backside, we're not going to give the colleges the money they need to continue to meet their inflationary pressures. The same thing on healthcare. Healthcare, the health authorities are getting money in year 1, but in year 2 and year 3, their budgets go way down. Well, the cost of inflation in health is more than the average cost of inflation. You're talking about 4 or 5% a year, and they're going to get, what, 2-3% a year? So what's going to be cut? How many services aren't going to be offered? Who's not going to get primary care? How long are the wait lists going to be? Are we really going to go after mental health and addictions and help with this opioid crisis? These are all legitimate questions that we get to ask during the estimates process.
Here's another question. Do you support their move to bump up again the assistance that people make who are
$50?
$50? Well,
Sure.
right.
Sure.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, no problem.
So it went up $100 a couple of years ago.
Yep.
That was in the dying days of the last.
Yeah, so the last
Liberal.
government, if I remember correctly, raised it. The current government raised it again, and now they're raising it
But
again.
it went
by
like
$50.
10 years under Liberal leadership on a flat line, right? Which could be,
You're probably right. But
which seems a little bit, imagine trying to get by on that.
It was tough. It was tough. And you know what? When I'm volunteering at the Gospel Mission, for the turkey dinners, and people come and talk with me as I'm putting food on their plate, they tell me what they think, and that's great. One person told me before the election, he says, Norm, you're going to win your seat, but your government's going to lose because you're too far to the center right. We need to address this issue. The balance is off. Well, as it turned out, we lost the election. I would just say that, was that person right? Well, the people have spoken. And now we're seeing that balance shift to the left. I'm concerned that this budget is okay in the short term, but in the long term, we have housing starts, which have fallen off. We have, and that's them that's that's telling us this
I heard a lot
by
of this
25%, right?
A lot of this criticism about the budget was about housing starts, and I'm not quite making the connection as to how this budget really attaches to a decrease in housing starts.
Well, they brought in the spec tax. The spec tax is a big reason why.
So this was a policy decision that had nothing to do with this current budget, but,
Well,
but nothing changed, I suppose, in this budget on that.
Well, they brought in the spec tax, and the spec tax is supposed to bring in some revenue, right? So they budgeted for the revenue in this budget somewhere. We haven't found it where yet, but we're still looking. Okay, it's probably rolled into something else. But what they have said is the property transfer tax that the government collected is going to stay the same for 3 years. Well, how is that possible? When they're projecting a drop of, I think, 25% in property sales. So if you got a 25% decrease in property sales, you should have a corresponding decrease in property transfer tax. But that's not in there. So that's why I'm saying I don't believe the budget. I'd say go back and do it again.
Another one, the carbon tax continues to go up.
$6 billion over 3 years is the take. And you know how much that's going back to fight climate change?
Well, most of it just goes into general revenue,
You're
which
right.
of course is needed. I mean, we all rely on general revenue. I mean, that's always looked upon as being, oh, look at that, they're putting it into general revenue. Well, that pays for things
Well,
you and I use.
When the carbon tax was brought in by Premier Campbell, it was brought in under the philosophy of being revenue neutral, right?
Right.
So you raise the tax on carbon, and at the same time you lower other taxes, and that way
There shouldn't have been any general revenue to spend had that
exactly
really been.
So what
through.
has the NDP done? Well, they've got rid of that, so now they have $5 billion more to
Right.
spend.
Yeah, they're getting a $5 billion surplus. 4.9 out of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's not well. First of all, I don't think that's the way you drive the economy, because you want to put the money back in people's pockets so they can spend it on things that they need to afford to live in all these communities that are expensive. Again, it's the standard NDP budget, which is tax high, spend high. In 1 year, Kit, that works just fine. In 1 year,
Right.
in 2 and 3 years, it doesn't work.
There's a couple of things in it that are really nice. We've mentioned both of them. I mean, some guy on the street really needs some money. Do you reach into your pocket and toss it to him? So yeah, they brought up that assistance level, and they've helped struggling students. So I mean, isn't that what a nice guy does?
Well, it's almost a $60 billion budget. You could afford to do those nice guy things with a $60 billion budget. You could afford to do it with a $55 billion budget.
Yes.
But over the long period of time, if you are going to raise taxes on the middle class, which this budget does, I think it's like $1,100 more for everybody per person, right? So if you're going to take the money from everybody to give to your preferred groups, which is what they've done, then you're going to end up with an economy that's going to come down. And then you won't have the money to continue to sustain those great programs that you want to sustain. For instance, $10 a day childcare. Great idea. But so far, only 2% of childcare spaces are $10 a day. And the reason for that is they basically run out of money. They have all these great things that they want to do, and they've done many of them in the year one. But they just don't have the wherewithal because the economy, they know, they can see it.
They run out of money and we run out of time, Norm.
That's impossible. Let's keep talking.
Anything else before we wrap this up that you want to bring up about the budget?
Well, the budget is a statement going to the people. And what they've said is we are looking at 1 year. We're going to raise taxes and we're going to raise spending a lot for the first year. And then we're going to go on a hope and a prayer for year 2 and 3. I don't think that's the right way to run a government.
No B- from you.
No.
Thanks for coming in.
Okay.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.